Hey, I saw a really quick non-binary tag on YouTube. It's just 3 questions, so that seemed like a good short-ish length of video to make for you. So question 1, what does it mean to you to be non-binary? So for me, the way I use that label is I think people tend to think of gender as male and female, and maybe they might recognize there's a spectrum there that people can fall upon, or if for a binary trans person, they just feel like the opposite. For me, I view gender as a big blob and mess and what have you. And my experience with gender is much more that everywhere. So for me, saying I'm non-binary means that I'm not just attached to this spectrum. I think it's a very kind of ambivalent term, which is part of the appeal as well, because that gender for me can be ambivalent, or it can be more fluid, and maybe one day it is very male or female, but that's fewer and far between for me. Question 2. How represented do you feel in the LGBTQ community? I'm going to give you a couple parts to answer this. So if you are looking at this from the perspective of mainstream media queer representation, I would say very little, maybe no representation. You do occasionally have folks who other people might describe as androgynous. Those people, I don't know that I have specifically heard them identify themselves that way. And it tends to just be assigned to people of a certain body type, and they are usually assigned female at birth. So they might lean a little bit more masculine or in between appearing, and they tend to have very lean type figures. You can be fat, or you can be curvy, or you can be short. You can have long hair and be androgynous. So there's some problems with saying those people are represented because of the disconnect of that definition, and also because they are not necessarily identifying that way themselves, or at least they haven't identified that way. Like if I think of Jaden Smith, who recently announced that he is representing a women's line of clothing and has for several years worn some women's clothing, skirts and dresses. There was a lot of discourse online when that was announced about, that's great, this non-binary person, and then other folks jumping in to say, he hasn't actually identified that way whatsoever. He's just representing this line of clothing. Which either way, whether it's a gender issue or just how he likes to wear his clothes and present, I think it's awesome. But that type of representation is brand new and very minimal, since I could only give you one specific example. If we're talking about, this part of the answer is going to get long. If we're talking about like what I see online, or when I read things that are like advocacy type things, I probably see a little more, but that's also because I tend to already read and go to more liberal news sites, media sites, places that are more progressive and on top of these issues. And even then, the non-binary aspect is still less represented than others, which I'm pretty okay with, because I don't feel like it's not present. It's just part of a bigger picture. And then maybe one day I'll get into a really serious video about privilege and oppressions and how that works when you're non-binary, and the pros and cons of different things. So then if we just talk about my real life day-to-day experiences, I would say I'm not super represented as a non-binary person, but at the same time, I, for example, went to a social trans event, and to my knowledge, I was the only non-binary trans person there, which was fine. no one seemed surprised or had questions or needed to like be educated on what non-binary was because I wasn't presenting specifically one way or the other, whereas everyone else there appeared to be. But again, I don't want to assume that for anyone either. I only personally knew a couple people to know how they identify. So, I started this channel because I don't see that non-binary representation, especially of just regular old adults living life. So I definitely see a need for it, but I don't know. I'm pretty confident, so I don't necessarily seek out a ton of outside validation either. I just sort of do my thing. And that's just personality-wise who I am. Yeah, so I don't know. We'll say 3% represented. How's that? 3%. I just made that number up, but I like it. I'm just going to go with it. All right, the last question is also number 3. Major positive things you have experienced being non-binary. So, small thing, but speaking as a non-binary person, this can be huge for us, is just being properly gendered. By strangers is cool because that means they're actually reading you correctly and not trying super hard to put you in one gender box or another, which is probably one of the most annoying things as a non-binary genderqueer person, at least to me. And like along with that, when your friends continuously tend to correctly use your pronouns and gender you without it being like a struggle for them. I have a newer friend, because he's a significant other of one of my better friends, who has only ever correctly gendered me. And I realized it recently. We were out meeting other people, and he introduced me and said, oh, they do this, this, and this. And I realized that he has always correctly gendered me, and that was super awesome. Like, that's just who I am for him. So then, like I said, it's the little thing that is a big thing at the same time. So the major thing I will give you is having an opportunity to be a voice and represent other people. I had an opportunity to speak briefly with a local ACLU rep, actually, about some transgender issues, some political stuff, and hear a little bit about some of the strategy that the ACLU uses, but also to provide some information, because one of the things she asked was if she talked about some visibility campaigns and if people were interested and willing to participate. Because it's one thing to, sign a petition and back different things. It's another thing to ask people to put their literal face on an ad campaign where people are going to see them and it may out them to people that they may or may not necessarily want to be outed to. So I have said it, I think, previously, that I'm pretty okay with being outed to whoever. If they don't already know, they can find out. And then one other similar thing that happened, and then I'll quit rambling because this is getting long, is I had a friend when I came out to him he works with some gay men's choruses. And our gay men's chorus here in my city is pretty inclusive. You can be trans or non-binary and audition for them. You can be a straight man and audition for them if you identify as a man and you can sing well enough to get through the audition process, because they're really good. You can join the Columbus Gay Men's Chorus. So my friend works with some other gay men's choruses and had asked me, when I told him I'd like him to start using the they, them pronouns and all that kind of thing, he mentioned that they are getting more interest from transgender individuals or non-binary individuals. And he was concerned because he knew that he is not necessarily educated about issues. And so he asked if I could be a resource for him. And I was more than happy to assure him that I would love to be a resource and answer questions as I can. Of course, I can't speak for every individual because people are just different people, but hopefully I can provide some insight and knowledge and guidance in that way. So, positive thing is definitely knowing that you can contribute to making life a little bit easier for other non-binary people. So with that, I thought this was going to be short, and it wasn't. So that's it. That was my non-binary tag. Good night.